One inexpensive embossing folder, a couple of pieces of thick card, and a few ink pads, and you have a card set with a matching folder to gift at Christmas. I don't know about you, but as a card maker, I often get asked by friends and family for cards. A simple gift such as this card set would set someone up with a few card giving occasions. I made 3 cards, a general friendship card, a birthday card, and a sympathy card. However, you could fill a folio such as this with cards you've already made. This folder is so easy to make and is a lovely gift for any occasion, but especially at this gift-giving time of year. Hi, I'm Debbie Hughes, and here on YouTube I share videos and how-to tutorials of the techniques and products I use. You'll always find links to these products in the YouTube description below, such as the Peony Bundle embossing folder I'm using today. Embossing folders come at a very reasonable price point as long as you already have some form of die cutting machine in which to use them. This particular folder from Simon Says Stamp is a 3D embossing folder, which means that there are various levels of embossing within the design to give the impression of dimension, with some elements being in the foreground and some in the back. To get the best impression with embossing folders, you need to use a thick card, and Simon has just released an extra heavyweight 130-pound card, perfect for the job. I cut pieces of card to A2 size, and in total I used 5 of these pieces. I used my favourite Distress Oxide combination I got from Christina Werner of old paper, evergreen bough and black soot. To blend the inks, I used a couple of the brushes from the new Simon set of assorted size brushes, along with an older brush I keep solely for black soot as it is such a dominant colour. Blending on a Tim Holtz glass craft mat, I started with old paper and covered roughly half of the card before moving on to evergreen bough, which I used to cover the rest of the card. However, I brought the evergreen bough colour over the old paper to create a blend between the two colours. Then I added a touch of black soot over the bottom of the evergreen bough. The aim is to have a gradient from black soot to evergreen bough to old paper. With the piece of card ready, let's look at the sandwich I used for the Gemini Junior. For die cutting, I used a plate, a shim, a piece of card, and an old magnetic mat, and a cutting plate, plus whatever I'm die cutting and the relevant die. When using a 3D embossing folder, I found all I needed was the base plate and the magnetic mat, the embossing folder with ink blended card. I've heard it recommended to spritz the card before embossing, but seeing as this card is already quite damp from the ink blending, I took that as enough and ran it through without spritzing. My plan was to gently rub the embossed peony design with white pigment ink. I'd seen Janis Makula's video the other day, which reminded me of this technique. With an embossed design covering the whole of the paper, this technique would work perfectly. But with this design, there is a lot of open space, and quickly I found I was getting ink on the background around the flowers. To remedy this, I took the smallest blending brush from the set and gently dabbed and rubbed white pigment ink over the embossed design while blending the areas around it with the original background colours. Slowly I built up the highlight with white pigment over the embossed design with a darker ink blended background behind. To add interest, I splattered the peony with white gouache, and you can see here that the consistency of the gouache that I mix is like a thick cream. I also took a brush loaded with black watercolour and splattered that lightly over the design too. Finally, I splattered clean clear water, which reacts with the Distress Oxide to leave lighter coloured spots. Because I'd been rubbing the embossed design with blended brushes, I wasn't sure if I'd smoothed out the design somewhat. To remedy this, I lined up the card back in the embossing folder, and you can sort of feel when it settles into place, and ran it through my die cutting machine again. Here's that sandwich again: plate, magnetic mat, embossing folder. And I do think running this through a second time brought back the embossed design beautifully. Because these cards will be in a folder, I didn't want them to be too thick, otherwise the folder I'd need to make would have to be equally chunky. So rather than mount the panel onto a white card base with foam tape, which I'd normally do, I used score tape instead. For the greeting, I'm thoroughly enjoying the pre-printed sentiment strips, in particular the black ones with white text. I looked through the ones I had and came up with a friendship quote from the Reverse Happy set. I trimmed that out with a scalpel and ruler, and then to add it to the card, I used a super thin 1/8 of an inch wide score tape. Again, keeping the layers flat rather than the foam mounted option I'd normally use. To add embellishments, I use these Stormy Sky Glossies from Julie Hickey Designs. I like that they are relatively flat so you don't add bulk, and also that you get 3 sizes of dots in each colourway to choose from. I added a selection of the white and black dots, picking them up with the tip of my scalpel to add them to the card. So here's the finished card, and I paired it with a black envelope. Using this design as a template, I made 2 more cards in the same manner, but used a birthday greeting from the All Things Happy set for one card, and a sympathy greeting from the reverse sympathy set for the other card. Now to start putting together the folder. I used a piece of the ultra thick card and scored it along the long side at 1/8 of an inch either side of the midpoint. So the midpoint would be 5.5 inches, and I scored at 5 3/8 and 5 5/8, and this will form the spine of the folder. I then trimmed along the short side at 7 inches, although later on I shave a bit more off this. To create a pocket for the cards to sit in, I need a pocket that's bigger than the envelope. The ones I'm using are a little under 4.5 inches. I cut a piece of card 5.5 inches wide by 3.5 inches high, and these dimensions, once the side folds have been taken account of, will create a pocket just a little bit bigger than the envelopes. I scored on 3 sides, 1/4 of an inch in, and then again 1/2 an inch in, and then cut as shown the corner pieces so that a little flap is left to secure and strengthen the bottom corner of each of the 2 lower corners of the pocket. So this is what it looks like once it's done, and those 2 little squares at the bottom are only attached along one side. And as you fold and form the pocket, these flaps fold in and add a sturdy base to the corners. I used score tape again and then added the pocket to the folder. So here you can see that the envelope does slot in nicely. When making this again though, I will add a touch more space to the pocket because by the time I added 3 cards and envelopes, everything fitted in, but it was a bit snug. I'd also adjust the size of the folder slightly. I ended up cutting the long side to be about 6.5 inches, and I also trimmed a shaving off the short sides too. So this is more of a prototype, but I thought you'd like to see how I adapted and adjusted as I went along. I had used 3 of the original pieces I'd made on the cards. I added the 4th piece to the front of the folder, matted on black card, to give it a bit more weight on the large front of the folder. I found a greeting in the reverse sympathy set which said "Praying for you," and I trimmed it out so that it just said "For you," and added this to the front with score tape, and also added the same white and black glossy dots. I cut the 5th panel I'd made down so that it fitted over the front of the pocket, and when looking at the pocket filled with cards, the same design flows from the pocket over the card front, and for consistency I added the glossy dots again. Here's the finished card set with matching folder, perfect for gifting at this time of year. The peanut bundle embossed design repeats itself on the folder, on the pocket and the front of each of the cards. From all occasion friendship card to birthday card and sympathy card. I'll leave links in the YouTube description to the products that I've used today, as well as a coordinating link to the blog post over at limedutydesign.com. I want to thank you for joining me, and if you've enjoyed this tutorial, I'd be delighted if you'd give it a thumbs up and to subscribe to this channel. Also, if you'd like to get notified when a new video is out, don't forget to hit the bell button next to the subscribe button too. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.